All right, so we got a question from Kang's New Style on YouTube, and his question was he always wanted to know if like the Mr. Miyagi Karate Kid style training would actually work, if training movements outside of the normal training environment would still contribute to effective technique. And while pretty much every other martial arts YouTuber, influencer, video person has weighed in on this, I might as well do it too. So let's take it from a slightly different tack than what most people do, and let's look at it from a motor learning standpoint. What it really comes down to, and I suppose I can grab a couple of studies as extra weight for this, but I'm not citing anything in specific here. When we look at the literature on motor learning, one of the things that we see kind of pretty frequently is that task-oriented or task-specific training is what is necessary to produce the correct modes of learning. So one of the things is motor learning, which is what martial arts is aiming for, right? I mean, there's other types of learning that goes into martial arts, but because we're a physical discipline and people are training largely for the physical discipline, first and foremost, what we are training is motor skills. And there are different categories of how they study and look at these. There's gross skills and fine skills, and most of what we do, as far as the literature is concerned, would be considered more in the realm of gross motor skills, where you're dealing with whole body coordination, as opposed to fine motor skills, which tends to be more manual dexterity tasks that require much more precision. You can absolutely argue that what we're doing requires fine motor skills because of the precision involved in a fight. But that's not generally how they look at it necessarily in the research, though you could make the argument that that's there. There's also things like doing sequential things and other formats like that. So there's this whole study of literature in there. And basically what it seems to come down to is that the closer that what you are doing in training mimics the final performance criteria, the better you're going to do. Now, there is a caveat there, and that is, and this is where I would really cite more studies. There is fairly strong evidence for people performing better, and we see this in strength as well. People perform better when they do sub-varieties of the larger motor pattern. So if you take a very specific thing and you just groove that one thing, right, you do it well. But if you take that one thing and you groove minor variations, across the spectrum, 3 or 5 different versions, but things like by changing the speed or changing pressure or something like that, changing angle slightly, what ends up happening is people end up performing better. Now, as far as to the why of people performing better, there's a couple of ideas there. One of the ideas is honestly that by performing through a greater range of possibilities, you have more opportunities to make mistakes, identify mistakes, and correct for mistakes. It gives you a better level of fine adjustment across the natural variability in the environment of carrying out a task, right? Because no task is carried out in a sterile, consistent, stable environment. All tasks are carried out in the real world where, so many variables come into play of how things change and are different. So what ends up happening is that if you group something too specifically, the natural variation outside of the laboratory is going to throw you off a little bit. However, if you train across a bunch of variables, you have more exposure to a variety of options, or small variations that have basically been encoded into your system of, I can still do this because this is still this variable. It's not some wild third variable or whatever. So on that side of things, you could say that doing perhaps less specific tasks could contribute to a degree to the success. But the thing is that when you're dealing with those variability situations, you're still carrying out the actual thing as well as one of the variations. So you still have your competition form, but then you have kind of subroutines that go along with it that just kind of work in parallel with it, so that you have just a broader margin of error. Now, that's all well and good. However, let's say you're dealing with something like sand the floor or wax the car, wax on, wax off, right? Something like that. The problem with those is they were never put into context, and that butts up against one of the issues that we come into in the motor learning literature as well, which is the fact that for lack of a better term, your state of arousal, or your mental state, your state of stress, matters a lot, and so the actual performance conditions, like your metabolic performance conditions, also need to be closer to the test. And so this is one of the reasons why sparring and live play are so important, because the just general underlying stress of having to read, make a decision, and commit to an action is stressful enough. But then you do that on top of the fact that you might be getting hit or otherwise attacked with a real salient chance of failure, raises the stress level, raises the arousal level to a point that is much closer to that of an actual fight, as opposed to the very routine and calm level of drilling. Now, I'm not saying at all that you shouldn't work to have your fight arousal come down. You should, but you also need your training arousal to come up, right? And you need to have a functional margin that neither over or under doses you in relation to one another, so that you actually have a clearer ability to do things, right? Lower states of arousal bring things into better focus, of course. So that's why that's a desired state. But unfortunately, in the real world, higher states of arousal are the norm. And so you just have to find that kind of buffer zone where the two can butt up against each other and meet, in a reasonable overlap. So it definitely does not address the arousal state. So in that sense, it is going to be of extremely limited utility, even if you were to consider it variation training. The other side of it too is, especially if you look at it in the sense of the Karate Kid, what you're also going to be looking at is the fact that, like, Daniel didn't know what he was doing. He just knew he was doing chores. And to the point where, like, it was a plot point that he was getting frustrated and was going to walk out on it. That's a massive part of the problem, because the fact is that he did not know he was training for something. And he was not training in any sort of context that gave him any clue as to that. So while those tasks may have been giving him some general gross motor pattern as far as being able to move his body in that way in general, it still does not give him the task-oriented specificity to be able to carry those out in reality. And honestly, this is all just a really long-winded way to say what everybody else has said, which is to say it's really just not effective training. It's not specific. It doesn't do the job. There are plenty of people out there who do maintenance and construction and these kind of things, and couldn't fight their way out of a wet paper bag because they're just not similar enough. However, you can go backwards on that in the sense of when somebody is learning something and you understand that they have a background in, construction work or something like that, you can say, hey, this movement's a bit like swinging a hammer, and that can help tie those skills together. So you can go in one direction, but not necessarily go in the other direction. So there are some like really base gross motor skills that everybody kind of needs, right? You need some general movement competency, i.e. you need to be able to move your body through space in a natural way, under load and without load, in the natural environment with, variable footing, with variable balance points, with offset loading as well as even loading. But the fact is that those general things will still need to be trained and put into a very specific container. Let's go ahead and use Bruce Lee's water analogy, which of course is not his. That's old Buddhist and Taoist talking points. But what we're looking at there then is, right, you have this general thing called water, and then you pour it into a container and it takes on the shape of that container internally because it is moldable, it's fluid, right? And that's all well and good, right? And then of course with water's energy states, higher arousal and lower arousal states, right, it can become more solid, more energetic, those kind of things. So if you were to take that idea, and of course it adds mass and resistance to things. So if you were to take just general water as your gross motor capability, then you still have to pour that into a container where it is useful to you, right? The water just poured out on the ground isn't particularly useful, becomes contaminated, right? You end up losing some. It's not a very efficient way to do things, right? But you start putting it into a receptacle, it becomes more useful for whatever you're doing, right? If you put it into a pressure chamber, it is able to become steam and become steam power, thus the Industrial Revolution. If you put it into a kettle, you can turn it into hot water for cooking, or for medicinal uses, or sterilization uses. You can put it into buckets and bins and whatnot for carry and storage to move water from one place to another place. And in that idea, right, you could say those general movement capabilities would be okay, right? I have actually met people who could be classified as movement morons. Their bodies are just not coordinated in any meaningful way and require a lot of groundwork in order to build on top of that. And that's one of the things that we see when we look at motor development especially in children. They do a lot of this with children, with the elderly, and with rehab patients, right? That's where they seem to be most interested. And one of the things that we see is, like, if people don't have a good baseline of just general gross motor skills, it is much harder for them to deal with finer motor skills. If people then continue to struggle, like if they have that good baseline and then they continue to struggle with those fine motor skills, then you can focus on the fine motor skills. But oftentimes the gross motor skills are just telling you where you are in space and how to orient yourself and stabilize yourself. And that is a major, major part of this. So if you had somebody who was an absolute motor moron, making them do a bunch of menial tasks or just getting stronger, just doing basic strength training and stuff, will up that game dramatically. But you get somebody who's already an athlete, it's not going to do anything for them at all. And you're going to be wasting their time. So to make a very long answer short, what we're actually looking at here is really kind of more nuanced and complex than what others have commented on, but the conclusion is the same, which is that you need task-specific and you need context-specific training. Non-context specific, non-task specific training will have some overlap because we're humans and we only have 2 arms and 2 legs and kind of common movement patterns. There's always going to be some amount of overlap. The question is whether it's going to be meaningful or not. And the general answer is that if you are not remedial in nature meaning that you do not have a significant deficiency in your motor skills, then most of that non-specific task-oriented stuff is not going to do a whole lot for your game. So, the general concurrence is going to be that it is not good training. It's just not good training. It's not going to, be something that can stand in place of proper regular training. But if you are well trained, you can use those tasks, retrofitted as a way to kind of use it as mental imagery training of being, thinking about stuff. And that's a whole other conversation, dealing with mental imagery and stuff. I'm definitely going to be doing a video about that before too long. Meditation and mental imagery is actually, like, visualization is actually really quite more powerful than people give it credit for. So you can retrofit your skills onto menial tasks and use that as a way of having it as kind of a meditative sort of training, and that's fine. But it doesn't work from the ground up in the other direction. You're not going to be able to build skills with it. And I think that's about all that I can say on this. And hopefully this was a more thoughtful response than you've been able to get from others. But yeah, thanks for asking the question. And please feel free to ask questions. Some things will not be worth a whole video, and I'll just answer them in the comments. But for certain, some things are definitely worth shooting a video for. So I am more than happy to answer questions where I can. I know people have made other requests on other videos that I still have to get to. Some of those came in during our shutdown after the fire period, so we just haven't been able to get to those since we've been rebuilding for the last year. But anyway, the whole point is, thank you for asking a question, and I hope it was satisfactory, and we will talk again soon. Good journey. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, share this with your friends or anybody else who might be interested in this kind of content. If you happen to be in the Metro Phoenix area, come in for a class or just stop in to say hi. We'd love to meet you. Definitely check out our socials and our website that has all of our contact information and all of the other relevant information. And more than anything, check out our Substack. Our Substack will be containing all of the links that we use to cite and reference in our videos, as well as exclusive training content that will be available for premium members. Memberships are cheap, but you can also sign up for free, and we do have articles for free, and we will have more free articles available for you. It is a fantastic platform for what we're doing here, and we hope to see you over there. So I will talk to you guys later, and look out for the next one. Good journey.